It was April. The ice was finally breaking on the Coaticook River. A trapper was walking the bank that morning. The kind of cold, quiet morning where the only sound is the water moving under the last of the winter melt. And then he saw it, something pale, just at the edge of the water, lying face down in 10 inches of marshy backwash. It was a young woman. She was wearing almost nothing. No coat against the Quebec cold. No shoes, just her underwear. She had been there a long time. Her name was Theresa Allore. She was 19 years old, a straight-A student. She had vanished 5 months earlier, just 400 meters from her own dormitory. And when the police looked at her body that spring morning, they reached a conclusion. They decided she had probably overdosed on drugs. They were wrong, and it would take her little brother, a boy who was just 14 when she disappeared, 40 years to prove it. Welcome back to Unfinished Dossier. If you believe a case should never be closed before the truth is told, take 1 second and subscribe. Because this story doesn't have the ending the police wrote for it. It has the one her brother spent his life uncovering. This is the case of Theresa Allore. The last time her family saw her, it was foggy. It was the fall of 1978. Thanksgiving weekend had just ended. And on a train platform in St. John, New Brunswick, a family was saying goodbye. Theresa was heading back to school, back to Quebec. Her younger brother, Andre, was traveling with her. And her other brother, John, just 14 years old, had a gift for her. A Styx album, a small thing, a little brother gift to mark her 19th birthday. John would remember that moment for the rest of his life. He would replay it for 40 years. His parents put Theresa and Andre on the train, and the train pulled away into the fog. That was the last time. That was the last time any of them saw her alive. But let me take you back, before the river, before the fog. Let me tell you who Theresa Allore actually was. Because in this story, in every story we tell on this channel, the person always comes before the mystery. Theresa was 19. She was bright, the kind of bright that teachers remember. A student in her first year at Champlain College, in Lennoxville, a small English-language college tucked into the eastern townships of Quebec. If you've never been to that part of Canada, picture this. Rolling farmland, quiet roads, small towns separated by long, dark stretches of countryside. Beautiful in the daylight, isolating after dark. It is the kind of place where everyone assumes nothing bad ever happens. Theresa was independent. She had left the family behind in New Brunswick to study. She was building her own life. She lived not on the main campus, but out in a residence in a tiny place called Compton, about 8 kilometers away. 8 kilometers. Remember that distance. It matters more than you'd think, because here is the reality of student life out there in 1978. There was a bus that ran between the residence and the campus. But if you missed it, and students missed it all the time, you had 2 choices. You could wait, alone, in the cold and the dark, or you could put out your thumb and hitchhike. Hold on to that image. A young woman, a dark country road, and a decision that thousands of students made without thinking twice. But I don't want you to meet Theresa as a victim. Not yet, because she wasn't a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a teenager who loved music, who just had a birthday, who was figuring out who she wanted to be. She had a little brother who idolized her, a 14-year-old who handed her a record on a train platform and watched her disappear into the fog. He didn't know it yet, but that boy was going to spend the rest of his life chasing the answer to one question. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're listening from tonight. This case is Canadian, but the families still waiting for answers are in every country watching this channel. So do me a favor. In the comments, tell me the city and the country you're watching from. Let's see how far Theresa's name travels tonight. Because that's the whole point. A name should outlive the silence around it. Now, Let's go to the 3rd of November, 1978. The last night anyone can say for certain that Theresa Allore was alive. Friday, the 3rd of November, 1978. It was a cold night in the Eastern Townships. The kind of damp, bone-deep cold that comes before the first real snow. That evening, Theresa made a small, ordinary decision. The kind of decision none of us think about. The kind that, in hindsight, becomes unbearable. Her friends were going out. Theresa chose to stay in. She wanted to study. She was a straight-A student, remember. So she stayed behind at the residence in Compton, 8 kilometers from campus, away from the crowd. One student would later say they saw her at the residence around 9 o'clock that night. And then nothing. That is the last confirmed sighting of Theresa Allore. 9 p.m., a residence in the dark. A 19-year-old who chose the responsible thing, to stay home and study. After that, the trail simply stops. There is no confirmed sighting of her leaving. No confirmed sighting of her on a road. No confirmed sighting of anyone with her. She was there, and then she was gone. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you about something. It's the first crack in this story. The first place where the system that should have protected Theresa failed her instead. When a 19-year-old vanishes today, we understand the urgency. The first hours matter. The first days are everything. But this was 1978, and the assumptions people made about a young woman who didn't come home were very different. She was a teenager. She'd recently moved away from her family. So when she wasn't immediately seen, the quiet, unspoken assumption settled in. Maybe she'd run off. Maybe she was with a boyfriend. Maybe she just left. That assumption that a young woman had simply chosen to disappear, it cost time. And in a case like this, time is the one thing you can never get back. Think about what that meant for her family. Hundreds of kilometers away in New Brunswick, waiting for a phone call, then waiting for news, then waiting for anything at all. Picture John, 14 years old, watching his parents' faces change, watching the phone become a thing they were afraid of. A child absorbing a kind of dread that no child should have to carry. Days passed, then weeks. The Quebec winter closed in. Snow fell across the eastern townships, across the quiet roads, across the river near Compton, and Theresa Allore was still missing. Let me put the geography in front of you again, because it haunts this entire case. She disappeared roughly 400 meters from her own dormitory. 400 meters. You could walk it in 5 minutes. How does a person vanish in the space of a 5-minute walk? That question has never been fully answered. Not in 47 years. Now, there was the matter of the hitchhiking. Investigators would later wonder whether Theresa, on some night, had put out her thumb on one of those dark roads. It's important to be careful here. It isn't known whether she hitchhiked that night. It's a possibility, not a fact. But it points at something real, at the vulnerability built into her daily life. A young woman, isolated, with no easy way home. Somebody, somewhere knew those roads too, knew that students walked them, knew that the bus didn't always come, knew how dark it got, and how alone a person could be out there. I want to pause here for a second. If you're still with me, and I hope you are because this is where the case turns, do 2 quick things for me. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who might remember something. And in the comments, tell me this. At this point in the story, what do you think happened to Theresa on that road? I read every theory. And on this case, the theories matter. You'll understand why in a moment. Because 5 months after Theresa Allore vanished, the spring thaw was going to give her back. And what the river revealed would not match the story the police were about to tell. April 13th, 1979. 5 months. That's how long Theresa Allore had been missing. 5 months of a family not knowing. 5 months of a 14-year-old brother imagining the worst and hoping he was wrong. And then, on the edge of the Coaticook River, near Compton, a trapper walking the bank found her. I told you how she was found at the start of this video. Face down, in about 10 inches of marshy water, wearing only her underwear. No coat, no shoes, in the Quebec cold. After 5 months in the elements, her remains were in terrible condition. Now, I want you to put yourself in the position of an investigator standing on that riverbank in 1979. You have a young woman, found near naked, outdoors, in water, months dead, 400 meters from where she'd last been seen. What would you conclude? Here is what they concluded. They decided it was a probable drug overdose. A drug overdose. Let that sit for a moment. Let's think about it the way Theresa's family would later be forced to think about it. For years, people who die of a drug overdose are not usually found stripped to their underwear, face down, in a freezing river, 400 meters from their bed. That is not what an overdose looks like. And there was more. Because over the years, as the family fought for answers, the contradictions in that official story would only grow. According to the family's account, toxicology gave no support to the overdose theory. And later, a coroner would conclude that Theresa had, in fact, probably been strangled. Strangled, not overdosed. Strangled. So how does a probable strangulation of a near-naked 19-year-old become a probable overdose? In the eyes of the people whose job it was to find the truth, that is the wound at the center of this entire case. That is the thing John Allore could never let go of. And honestly, neither could I when I first read this file. I want to be careful and fair here. Investigators in 1978 and 1979 did not have the tools we have now. No widespread DNA analysis. Different attitudes. Different assumptions about young women, about drugs, about who deserved a thorough investigation and who didn't. But fairness cuts both ways, because the evidence on that riverbank was screaming one thing, and the official conclusion said another. And so Theresa Allore's death was, in effect, set aside. Filed. A bright young woman, a straight-A student, a daughter and a sister, reduced to a probable overdose. A story that let everyone stop asking questions. Everyone except one person. I need to ask you directly. Based on everything you've heard so far, the near-naked body, the freezing river, the strangulation finding, the 400 meters, does the word overdose sit right with you? Comment one word, overdose or murder. I want to see where this room lands before I tell you where the evidence eventually led. Because the 14-year-old boy from the train platform grew up, and he came back for his sister. For more than 20 years, the official story stood. Theresa Allore, probable overdose. Case effectively cold. The family grieved. They doubted the story they'd been told. But what can a grieving family do against an official conclusion? Against the weight of the system? And the boy, John, he grew up carrying it. He left Canada. He studied. He even worked as an actor for a time. He built a life hundreds of kilometers away, eventually settling in the United States. But the train platform never left him. The fog never lifted. The question never stopped. And then, around the year 2002, John Allore did something extraordinary. He decided to investigate his own sister's death. Think about what that takes. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a detective. He was a grieving brother with a question that had haunted him since he was 14 years old. And he decided that if no one else would find the truth, he would. He hired an investigative journalist to help him. Together, they began to assemble the evidence the original investigation had ignored. They argued, compellingly, not only that Theresa had been murdered, but that her death might be connected to others. He started a blog. In time, It became a true crime podcast with a name that is also the only question that ever mattered to him. Who killed Theresa? And here's the part that should stop you cold. John Allore didn't just reopen his sister's case. He went looking for a pattern. Because as he dug into Quebec's unsolved death from that era, he started seeing the same terrible shape over and over. Young women, found outdoors, often near water, often unclothed or partially clothed, often strangled, with strange details, missing purses, missing shoes. Names began to surface alongside Theresa's. Louisa Camirant, Manon Dubé, a 10-year-old child, found in a block of ice, far from where she'd last been seen. John came to believe that his sister may not have been a tragic, isolated accident at all. He came to believe she may have been one victim of a serial killer operating in the eastern townships in the late 1970s. Good hunting grounds, he once grimly called that area. Isolated students, dark roads, a bus you could miss. Now, I have to be very clear with you here because the truth deserves precision. These connections are John Allore's theory. They are a brother's investigative argument, built over 2 decades. Theresa's murder remains officially unsolved. No one has ever been convicted of killing her. And I am not going to stand here and put a name on her death that a court never did. But I'll tell you what John Allore did accomplish. And it's remarkable. His work, his relentless, grieving, brilliant work, helped pressure the Sûreté du Québec into creating a cold case unit in 2004. A unit to re-examine exactly these kinds of forgotten files. Cases that had been set aside. Cases like his sister's. A 14-year-old who watched his sister vanish into the fog grew up to change how an entire province investigates its dead. Let me say that again, because it's the soul of this whole story. He couldn't save Theresa, but he made sure the next family might get the answers his never did. I need to step out of the story for just a moment, because what John Allore did is the entire reason this channel exists. One person refusing to let a name go quiet. If this story has moved you even a little, share it. Send it to one person. Every share carries Theresa's name a little further from the silence that almost swallowed it. That's not a favor to me. That's a favor to her. Now, let's bring this all the way to today, because the file is still open. So where does the case of Theresa Allore stand right now? In 2016, 38 years after she disappeared, the Sûreté du Québec confirmed they were re-examining her case. In fact, her name sat at the very top of their cold case list. First, out of more than 24 people missing or believed murdered in that region since the late 1970s. Think about that number for a second. More than 24. John Allore wasn't imagining a pattern. The province itself had a list. In 2020, John, together with the journalist Patricia Pearson, published a book about Theresa's death and his long search. A brother's 40-year quest, finally bound between 2 covers, so that no one could ever quietly file his sister away again. And yet, for all of it, the podcast, the cold case unit, the book, the renewed investigation, I have to tell you the truth this channel always tells. Theresa Allore's murder is still officially unsolved. 47 years later, no closure stamped onto the file. The question on that podcast, who killed Theresa, still does not have an answer the courts will confirm. But something did change. Because of one brother, Theresa Allore is no longer a probable overdose. She's no longer a closed file nobody questions. She is a murder victim whose name a province now knows. Whose case sits at the top of the list. Whose story you just heard. That is what refusing to let go can do. It can't always bring the answer, but it can make sure the question never dies. This is what we mean on this channel by an unfinished dossier. An official record with no ending. A family still waiting. A truth still buried near a quiet Quebec river. I want to leave you not with the river, not with the failure or the cold, or the silence. I want to leave you with her. Theresa Allore was 19 years old. She was a straight-A student. She loved music. She had a little brother who gave her a record on a train platform and never stopped loving her for a single day of the 47 years since. She was a whole person, not a case file, not a theory, not a probable anything, a person. And somewhere out there, the truth about what happened to her on that dark road in November of 1978 still exists. Someone may still know it. Memories surface. Deathbed words get spoken. Cases like this one do get solved. If you have any information about the death of Theresa Allore, you can contact the Sûreté du Québec. It is never too late. Before you go, do the one thing that matters most on this channel. Subscribe. Not for me. For her. For every file like hers that someone tried to close too soon. When you subscribe to Unfinished Dossier, you become part of the reason these names stay spoken. So subscribe and never let a case go cold. I'm going to keep telling these stories. The forgotten ones. The set-aside ones. The ones with a brother or a mother or a stranger who simply refused to stop asking. Every file has a story. Not every story has an ending. This was the case of Theresa Allore. Thank you for not letting her go cold.